Hello, this is Don Carter. Welcome to this course overview of the Thawing the Inner Family of Self program, or TIFS. I'll be using the Free Mind mind mapping software in order to give you a bird's eye view of the course. I encourage you to download the Free Mind software from their website and then download this mind map, as it will be a very handy tool, as you'll see during this overview. The downloads and links are available in this section of the course. The TIFS program is designed to help overcome all sorts of issues that stem from growing up in a less than nurturing family. Low self-esteem, abandonment issues, toxic shame, relationship problems, temper problems, depression, post-traumatic stress symptoms like hypervigilance and hypersensitivity, worries, anxieties, fears, and phobias, just to name a few. As you can see, the TIFS program has three elements: the prerequisites, the assessment phase, and the recovery phase. The prerequisites are certain elements that you'll need to understand before beginning the assessment and recovery processes. The first element is the iceberg presentation. This is the basis of all my books, websites, and this particular course. I created the iceberg model over the past 27 years in order to help my clients overcome issues that have already been mentioned here. You can view the iceberg lecture on an online presentation in the next section of this course, or you can read about it in the Thawing Adult Child Syndrome book, which is the second book in my Thawing the Iceberg series. I began writing the series about this time last year, in October of 2011. The first book in the series is Thaw, Freedom from Frozen Feelings. It's been on the bestsellers list on Amazon.com for over a year. The three following books are follow-ups to the original work, and each of these books go in three different directions, having workbooks at the end of each of the books. The books all start out with the iceberg model in order to have the books be able to stand alone rather than having to purchase all of them in order to do the work inside. I chose the Thawing Adult Child Syndrome for this particular course because it has all the elements for the assessment process, and we'll go into much detail as we go through that process. If you'll notice these red arrows under certain links, those are hyperlinks that will take you to a web page that will tell you more about each of these topics that have the arrow. And for example, if you want to learn more about the first book, you click that arrow and it'll take you to my website, where you can see a video and read about the Thawing the Ice, or Thaw, Freedom from Frozen Feelings in this case. And the next element in the prerequisite section is the ego state maps. We need to be able to have a general understanding of ego states in order to proceed with the assessment and recovery process. In this link, there's a page that reviews all three levels of the ego state maps outlined in transactional analysis. There's also a video about ego states on that link. Then you can click each of these links to get a detailed map of each level. I'll give you an example of an ego state map. Here's the video, and then this is the first level ego state map, and the second level, and the third level. And this page has three summaries of each of those levels. And when you click on any one of the levels, you'll go to a page with more details on each of those ego state maps. And the next area of prerequisites is to create a safe place or a safe container to do the work of recovery. It's very important to do this because we'll be working with childhood abandonment issues and other traumatic childhood experiences in the recovery process. And need for a safe place with safe people is of paramount importance. For instance, having a 12-step group or a church group, a therapist or a coach, healthy family members and friends, higher power, a getaway or a retreat, a place to go be with yourself in a healthy environment where you can rejuvenate yourself and do some recovery work, and maybe even a sponsor or mentor. Any one of these is what I call a safety bubble. And if you have all of these, then you have a lot of bubbles that can come together into forming a very good safe container. It's important to do the safe container again, because if we don't do that with enough support, we could end up re-traumatizing certain parts of ourselves. If you're not sure whether or not to proceed, you can always give me a call or email me by clicking on this link here or going to my website to contact me for a free telephone screening. We'll talk about whether online coaching or counseling is right for you. Many people can do this program on their own. Others who are new to recovery may need a little more assistance with that. Okay, in the next two videos we will cover the assessment phase and the recovery phase of the TIFS program. Hi, welcome to part 2 of the TIFS course overview. In this video we're going to be looking at the assessment phase of the TIFS program. In this phase there are 12 steps. The first step has to do with completing a life script questionnaire number 1 and plotting the outcome on a graph. This will give us some specific areas of woundedness as well as some specific survival strategies that we've developed to defend against those wounds. In step 2 we'll review family history and take a look at the parenting that we got by completing life script questionnaire number 2. And we'll also identify any reference experiences or traumatic experiences that have left a mark that cause problems later on in our adult years. In step 3 we'll identify any survival roles or coping styles that we use as a result of our survival strategies. Survival roles include being the family hero, either the flashy one or the behind-the-scenes responsible one, the family rebel or scapegoat, who's always in trouble and misbehaving, the lost child, who gets lost in the crowd, and the mascot, who's always on stage. You'll hear about or read about these survival roles in the iceberg presentation. We'll also look at the coping styles that each part of us tends to use. Coping styles include fighting a script that we've identified up here, fighting a pattern of behavior, or surrendering to that pattern of behavior, or avoiding having to choose either way. Let's say, for instance, we have a people-pleasing pattern of behavior. If we want to fight that particular pattern to cope with it, then we'll have some behaviors that are designed towards not pleasing anyone. And if we surrender to the people-pleasing pattern, then we'll want to try and please everyone. And if we want to avoid worrying about pleasing others, we just stay away from people altogether, or some other method of avoiding the issue. In step 4, we'll look at family rules and injunctions that are pretty much unspoken but deeply embedded in the subconscious programming that we get. Our family may teach us don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, don't be or don't exist, don't succeed or don't do better than me, don't do anything, be careful, don't be a child, don't belong, don't grow up, don't be well, don't be important, don't be you, be who I want you to be more like your brother, don't be close. These are just a few examples of family rules and injunctions that get deeply embedded in the subconscious mind of the family members. And sometimes they don't get passed on, they just are the results of misinterpretations by the child. And yet they get deeply embedded anyway. And these rules can drive our behavior, as we'll see in the next step. The 5 drivers create a safety net of okayness. If I obey my driver behaviors, then everything's okay. But if I violate one of those drivers, then I can fall through the safety net into the land of un-okayness, of not being okay. And the 5 drivers can be summed up in these 5 patterns. Be strong, be perfect, please others, try hard or make everything a struggle, or hurry up. Now, most of us can relate to all 5 of these drivers, but we all usually have a hierarchy where one of them will take the top spot and another one will be number 2, and we may even have a combination of try hard to please others and be perfect. Various combinations of these. But they're called drivers because they drive everything we think, feel, and do. And if we're obeying those drivers, then we're in the safety net of okayness. Everything's fine as long as I'm obeying those drivers. But as soon as I violate a primary driver, I get triggered into an emotional theme, which we'll talk about in the next step. To give an example, if I have a be perfect driver and I make a mistake and someone important to me notices it, then I could fall through the safety net into a place of unokayness, where if I externalize it, then I'm okay and you're not. If I internalize it, then I'm not okay, I'm bad, I'm stupid, and you're okay, or nothing and neither one of us is okay. So this is when I get triggered into those emotional themes. And in step 6 of the TIFS program, we need to identify what emotional themes are we familiar with and what's the cycle of drama that we're used to. A theme, when we get triggered, would include an excessive childlike experience of anger or sadness or fear, perhaps a sense of shame or guilt that's excessive, or maybe glad, feeling glad or silly or like a clown, or maybe even numbing out. Now these feelings are just feelings, but if we have them as emotional themes, then they're excessive feelings, and once we get through the episode we feel like that was kind of childish or childlike. That's when we get triggered into one of those emotional themes, and that's when everything's not okay. And then I can experience a certain chemistry or a drama cycle that goes along with being triggered. And in fact, this is a cycle that just goes round and round when I'm triggered. I have experience of a negative chemistry. You can think of it as little brown frowny faces floating through your bloodstream, and a bad feeling of negative chemistry that builds until I look for some comfort and relief, and when I find the comfort and relief, it's like I got little happy faces flowing through my bloodstream now, and I feel better. And then, like any other anesthetic or sedative, that happy feeling wears off pretty soon, and then I have no chemistry at all. When I have no chemistry at all, as a couple we may get bored. And then one of us may say exactly the right thing at exactly the wrong time, triggering the other one, so that we get into a phase of negative chemistry, where one of us distances and the other pursues. And there's a fight or some other kind of drama that takes place. Well, sooner or later, both participants in that situation would like to just get past everything. So we either make up or we have a ceasefire. And that's when we experience that positive chemistry. And again, that only lasts for a short time till we have no chemistry, because we have to have that chemistry of drama, which is what we're used to. So somebody will say exactly the right thing at exactly the wrong time, and we'll start another cycle. Okay, and step 7, we need to look at the drama triangle roles and other mind games that we can play. We call these games, but they're not really any fun. In fact, they're more harmful than helpful. And all the other games beneath the drama triangle are just variations of the drama triangle. The drama triangle has 3 roles. There's always a persecutor, and then there's a persecutee or a victim, and then there's a rescuer to come in and save the day and rescue the victim. and that's why they call it a triangle. It's a triangle of drama. Now, typically in families, when there's people that gravitate toward one of these roles, but the drama comes in when there's a switch. Maybe the persecutor starts getting persecuted by the rescuer, who gets rescued by the victim for being persecuted. That's when the drama can really get bad. There are other variations on the drama triangle, like the "now I got you, you SOB," and the other game might be "kick me," where I wear a "kick me" sign, or I say exactly the right thing at exactly the wrong time, and the "now I got you, you SOB" comes in. And we have maybe cycles of punishment and forgiveness. Those all create that chemistry of drama. Now, the next thing we want to do in the assessment process is get to meet our various aspects of self, or parts of self. And I call it meeting the inner family of self. And we can do that as we inventory our parts or our ego states through something I call the ego state projection exercise. This is where we project out into the room and separate from various parts of me. Maybe I've detected angry feelings, and I invite those angry feelings to take a form and a shape on the other side of the room or in a chair opposite me. As in Gestalt therapy, when I do empty chair techniques, or other therapies where I dissociate or I separate from those different parts of myself. I can have as many as 3 to 5 different parts in the room at the same time and have them communicating their thoughts and feelings. And we'll go through an ego state projection exercise in one of the audios in this course, and you'll see how it works. And then there's also another exercise we can do called ego state mapping, which is good for exploring your inner landscape. With ego state mapping, we discover which part or parts is most active. Is it a critical part, an angry part, a vulnerable, scared, or needy part? Which part is most powerful? Do we disown or reject certain parts of ourselves? How do our parts get along with each other? How do we get along with our parts? Do I like certain parts and hate other parts? Do I have conflict between parts? Ego state mapping will help us get a lay of the land, or help us explore that inner landscape. And then we also, throughout the process, be gathering evidence of our core limiting beliefs. Maybe beliefs that I'm not lovable, I'm not worthwhile, I'm not good enough, I'm less than, I'll never be okay, I'll never get what I want, I'll never get what I need. Those limiting core beliefs and magical thinking of childhood can dog us into adulthood and cause problems in our relationships. So we want to identify those core beliefs, and each part may have its own core belief. And we want to look at the magical thinking, like black and white thinking, or personalizing, or catastrophizing, or mind reading, the magical thinking that each part might engage in. And we want to start looking at what those core beliefs are, because those will have to become targets of change. And having completed all of these first 10 steps, we will now be able to put it all together in a one-sheet summary of all the above. And this will be my survival mode, or my self-preservation system. If I'm engaging in these dysfunctional patterns and rules, then I'm in survival mode. And when I'm in survival mode, I can't grow, I can't heal. All I can do is exist. And I can begin to experience stress-related disorders if it goes on long enough and it's bad enough. I can get chronic fatigue, or fibromyalgia, or even adrenal exhaustion. And once I've completed all this and collected enough to fill in my self-preservation system, then we can begin goal setting for the recovery phase. We'll use a neurolinguistic process called the well-formed outcomes process in order to set primary goals. And in the next video, we'll look at how we can put all that into action to begin a recovery process. Hi, welcome to part 3 of the TIFS course overview. In this video we're going to explore the recovery phase of the program. The recovery phase has 9 steps. The first step is to move from simultaneous incongruence to sequential incongruence. Basically what that means is to project the ego states out of ourselves into the room around us so that we can sort them out and work with them one at a time to begin to overcome conflict and create harmony. When we have simultaneous incongruence, all those parts of self are running around inside the mind and creating a commotion and conflict that's very hard to sort out. So once we move them out into the room and we have all the parts involved with a certain process out there, then we can have sequential incongruence. It's still incongruent, but at least it's sequential so that we have it sorted out and we can work with the parts that are involved. And incongruence, in other words, is conflict. And what we want to shoot for is a lack of conflict or harmony and integration. The second step of the recovery process is to develop rapport and trust with the parts that we've projected out into the room. To do that, we want to identify the function of each part and the type of each part. Let's say we found a critical part involved in a conflict. We want to know what the function of that critical part is. The function may be something like to motivate me. And then if its function is to motivate, we want to know what type of criticism it uses to motivate us. Is it a harsh, abusive type of criticism, or is it a taskmaster type of criticism, or is it a nurturing kind of criticism? And we need to find out. There's various types of parts that are involved in these things. We also need to know about the principle of positive intention, which simply states that every part of self lives in the same house, and so they all have a positive intention for the personality as a whole. Even if you don't like what a part is doing, even if you don't authorize what a part is doing, that part has a positive intention, and it thinks it needs to perform its function on cue, or that positive intention that will never be coming about. Now we have to remember that it's the intention that we want to appreciate, even if we don't appreciate the outcome. The strategy may not produce the positive intention. In fact, it may produce something quite opposite of that. It may produce pain or something harmful. We must keep in mind that the part didn't intend to create the pain, and the part was created in childhood, and so the part is not a rocket scientist, and we have to take it on faith that that part has a positive intention. It's kind of like the old adage of separating the child from the behavior. Love the child, hate the behavior. We love the part and hate the behavior if the behavior is harmful. In that way, we can start to build rapport with the parts, at least appreciating they're trying to do something good. And once we've identified the function, type, and positive intention of each part, we want to begin to have them dialogue between themselves. And in doing so, we're creating integration, because when one part of the mind or the neural circuitry is communicating with another part of the neural circuitry, pathways are being opened up or developed or established. And dendrites are connecting to axons, and neurogenesis or brain growth is a result of that. And that connecting and communicating a dialogue between the parts can help produce integration. And remember, a fragmented self that's in conflict with each other is the nature of our problem. So we want a harmonious, integrated self, and this dialogue is critical for that. And also we want to develop rapport between the parts. We want them to gain an understanding and maybe even a working alliance, whereas in the past they didn't know each other and they were pulling in opposite directions. Perhaps even with the same positive, deep purpose to produce happiness. In step 3, once we've gained some trust and rapport with the various parts of self, now we want to gain permission to access the wounded part. And what that means is wounded parts are usually suppressed or repressed deep down into the psyche and covered over with defense mechanisms. In this model of therapy, those defense mechanisms are referred frequently to as managing parts or guardian parts or protecting parts, but they all have a function, a type, and a positive intention. The wounded parts carry the pain. The managing parts help manage the pain by performing a defensive function or maneuver in psychoanalytic terms. First thing we do to get that permission is identify and present unintended negative consequences related to that current strategy, such as protection or perfection or approval seeking or people pleasing or any of the other dysfunctional patterns of behavior. We want to identify any negative consequences related to those strategies, which is not very difficult to do. All we need to do is to approach the intuitive, creative part of our mind and ask the simple question, what are 3 unintended negative consequences to perfectionism? We take those unintended negative consequences back to the guardian part or the protective part, and we gently offer those unintended consequences to the part and receive its response. And frequently they're frustrated because they don't know what to do other than what they've been doing. That's what they were created for. That's our job, is to help them see that what they're doing is not helpful and help them find a new job or create a new job for them. So from the adult ego state, we reassure any concerned parts that the adult part of us can and will take over now. And we reassure any concerned parts that we won't get lost in the pain of that wounded part, because we're going to help dissociate or disconnect ourselves from the pain while working to heal the pain at the same time. And we let the protective parts know that the wounded part will heal and that the old strategy of defense will no longer be necessary. Sometimes this triggers the fear in one of the defensive parts that it will no longer be necessary because the strategy is no longer necessary. In that case, we remind the managing parts that the role modification back to their original intended purpose is what we will be endeavoring to do, and that they will still be needed, because all parts of self can be helpful and have talents and abilities, and are even necessary in many cases. Once we have permission to access that wounded part, then we go ahead and do so. We access the wounded part and ask it to contain all the feelings and separate from us so that we can help it heal. If it doesn't separate and we get engulfed with all that repressed pain, then it's hard to stay in our problem-solving part and help the part to go through the processes involved in healing. The next thing we do is also to be prepared in case we can't disconnect from a traumatic memory. And it's important to be prepared to do 1 or 2 degrees of visual or kinesthetic dissociation. In other words, to separate in 2 or 3 separate ways from that woundedness if it's unable to disconnect. If we don't do that, then we're going to run the risk of re-traumatizing a part of ourselves and having that much more work to do. So this, if it can't be done in work with self-help or with the tools that you do have, then I would suggest you stop the process at this position right here and you reach out for help with a professional. Because to try and force this healing while being unable to disconnect with trauma is not the safest thing to do. So we have to be sure that we can dissociate at least enough to be able to maintain the ability to work through our issues through these processes. So word of caution there. And then we also need to check for and work with any remaining concerned or objecting parts as we go through this process, and do the same thing we did to get permission in step 3. And then in step 5, once we've accessed the wounded part and began working with it, then our main task is to develop a trusting, empathetic, and safe environment for that wounded part. And as we do that, we have the wounded part tell us its story. And it's usually a younger part of ourselves than in the imprint period, maybe the first 7 years of life, or the modeling period, the from 8 to 13, and maybe even the socialization period, which is adolescence. But we have whatever parts are involved in the problem we're working on. The wounded parts need to tell their story to someone who can witness their story, not necessarily try to cheer them up or fix it, just to hear their story and be able to have compassion and empathy for that part. So in that case, the adult ego state, or our true self, may want to remain connected just enough to have some sense of what this part went through as it tells us its story. So we might reconnect for that purpose and that purpose alone, just to get a sense of what it's feeling and what it's been through. And hopefully that part will see our compassion and empathy and be able to take that in. We want to always monitor and check and see if the wounded part is actually taking in the compassion and the empathy, because that's a healing experience for the wounded part. That's a good beginning to the healing process. Step 6 is all about healing. This has processes within processes here. In step 6, once we've developed a safe environment with empathy and trust, and the younger part of ourself, the wounded part, is ready and able to go through the healing process, then we want to select an imprint experience and re-imprint that. So we select an issue from the part story or from our self-preservation system. We have the wounded part take us back to the imprint experience through something called an affect bridge. And we want the wounded part to be able to go through a 12-step re-imprinting process, which we'll cover in another video. This will be a very powerful thing if everything we've done up to this point has been done correctly. And then after the re-imprinting process and the new experience has a chance to settle, we'll repeat it with whenever desired in order to strengthen those results there. And once we've done step 6 and done the re-imprinting, then we move to step 7, which is a process of retrieving that wounded part from the harmful or toxic environment, moving it into a safe sanctuary that we create in the present moment, prepare that part for the release of the emotional toxins, and identify any necessary resources for healing. And then within the sanctuary or safe place, complete an emotional release process, including infusion of healing resources into the spaces left by the release process. And again, the wounded part may have multiple issues. We just try to work on a few issues at a time. We negotiate with the managing parts to stay as neutral as possible in between sessions and let the adult take over, rather than lapsing into those old behaviors while the healing process continues. I don't want to minimize the power and the complexity of these emotional releases, but for the time allotted in this video, we're just going to cover that there is such an emotional release process, and it's very powerful. And then once the emotional release has occurred, then the parts that were protective defense mechanisms will need some time to readjust and be assigned new roles. So we access any managing defense mechanisms, ask if they're now aware of the wounded part and how it's now healed or healing. If not, we introduce the new healing wounded part to the manager, and we ask the manager to check and see if the old strategy is really no longer necessary. If the managing part says no, it may still be necessary, you ask the manager what the objections or concerns are and negotiate or reassure as needed. And then we remind the manager of your adult resources and let it know you can handle things now. And then we ask the managing part to visualize itself as if it no longer does that dysfunctional or unhelpful behavior. And we help that manager or that defense mechanism to visualize itself doing its original intended purpose in several different contexts. And we can help teach that part through a process called a new behavior meditation process. Teach it the how-tos of doing a healthy behavior that it was intended to do. And we do this for every managing part involved in the issues that we're now working with. As a result of the recovery process, we will have created my self-actualization system. Remember, in the end of the assessment phase, we had the self-preservation system. Well, the self-actualization system is the growth mode, and this is what we want to have. So once we've completed a process, a recovery phase here, then in a journal we make a list of the parts that were working with us in the process above. We record their new jobs, their new resources, their new beliefs.